Hi, Marshall Almroad again, and we have Charlie the mic. And got to finish the story I started about Granny Geer. This was the last recording we had earlier. And we're going down the hill from Capstone Conference 1987 at Park City, going down the hill towards Salt Lake City and getting her back to where she stays with the pastor. And she's praying for me because I wasn't sure if I should stay in this ministry or do something else because I just didn't see any fruit. And she says, well, I'll pray and you keep your eyes open. You keep driving. So I'm driving. And she prays that a Mormon would come out, a temple Mormon would come out of the Mormon church because of my witness as a fleece, as an answer from God that I should continue in this ministry. And she says, when I die, I want you to take the baton and go to my Mormon friends and relatives and my Mormon people with the gospel. And I said, okay, Granny, of course, how can you be Granny when you're not Granny? I'm not even a female, but anyway, that's what she wanted. So, okay, fine. So I get back home and I'm thinking, okay, God, I'm not talking to a Mormon and, I got a year and when do we start, and so I'm kind of wondering what's happening here, and I'm talking to some Mormons at work and they don't want to talk to me. And so, okay, fine. And I'm thinking about Mark McAllister because he's the guy that first started this whole thing. And I'd sure like to see Mark come out of the Mormon church. So I'm thinking about Mark. And, it's like, okay, but it wasn't Mark. And about 3 months later, this guy I'm working with directly in the same building, I challenged him with the paragraph. We talked about the paragraph earlier about this edition. Some minor errors in the text have been perpetuated in past editions of the Book of Mormon. This edition contains corrections that seem appropriate to bring the material into conformity with pre-publication manuscripts and early editions edited by the prophet Joseph Smith. So I used that paragraph with him and said, if they got all these changes, somebody has to know something. So you need to write to the LDS church and ask them the question. He goes, why don't you write them? I said, they're not going to listen to me. You're a temple-worthy member of the Mormon church, wearing underwear, full-fledged Mormon. I mean, they got to listen to you. They're not going to listen to me. I'm some anti, and I have sincere, honest questions. So I kept after him and after him. His name is Jerry Allen. Well, eventually, Jerry said, okay, Marshall, let's get together. We'll do it at lunch, and we'll do it at break times, and we'll talk. And he says, I'm gonna show you that there's three gods in the Bible. And I said, okay. He said, what do you mean, okay? Okay. He says, you're going to let me show you the three gods in the Bible? I said, absolutely. He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going to go to Isaiah when you get done. We'll talk about how the three gods are one. But yeah, you show me three. So I let him be first. And he's taken a notes every single day on his journal about how he's witnessing to Marshall. And we're going through all this stuff. And we became really good friends. And so eventually he would ask me a question once in a while, ask me a question about Mormonism. And I'd tell him and he'd go, that's not what I've heard. And I go, well, I can show you the documentation. Okay, show me. I want to see it. So I'd show him. I say, you sure? Yeah. Well, it's not anti-Mormon literature. I'm going to quote right from your Book of Mormon or whatever. So we just kept showing him stuff and he kept saying, well, I don't like that. Oh, I get that. I don't like it either. And so we'd laugh and we'd have fun. And then some days he'd just be mad at me. So, when he'd say, just leave me alone. Okay, fine. So he's trying to digest this. He's upset. So we just kept working back and forth. And pretty soon one day he says, I got something really good, really good. I said, okay, show me. So he shows me something in the Book of Mormon he thinks really good. I said, well, that's pretty good. He goes, no. It's really good. I go, that's pretty good. No, really, really good. I said, nah, pretty good. He says, you got something better? I go, of course I do. So I opened the Book of Mormon to something better. And he goes, man, that's a lot better. I go, yeah, I told you. He goes, well, how long have you known that? I said, long time. He goes, well, why didn't you tell me earlier? I said, Jerry, I'm not going to inundate you. When you're ready for something, just ask me, I'll show you. He says, okay, I'm ready. Show me everything. I go, that ain't going to happen real fast because I know a lot. So we learned the Doctrine and Covenants together, Pearl of Great Price together. We started learning stuff. And I never got my turn because Jerry became a Christian before that. Now, he became a Christian because I kept showing him occasionally. I started with the Book of Mormon, and then I started seeding him with the Bible. And I'm showing him, well, see, the Bible says this, Book of Mormon says that. Well, I like the Bible better here. Yeah, me too. And so he's starting to transfer his allegiance from the Book of Mormon to the Bible. And we talked about Jesus never walking on the American continent, didn't pick out 12 more apostles. I mean, hello, if Jesus picked out 12 more apostles, that means he lied to his first 12 apostles when he said, you guys go to all the world, except for the American continent. He didn't say that, all the world. And, spread the gospel to the whole world. Well, he knows they're going to be failures because Jesus can't start his church and be successful. There was a total apostasy. So he had to start it over again in America. And of course, evil got so bad that Jesus, it's like, oh my goodness, yeah, I'm going to have to stop my church and wait till the evil gets better, And so he had to stop his church for 600 years or so. And then, had to get Joseph Smith because he did more for Christianity than anybody else. So he had to get Joseph Smith to start the church again. We go through all this kind of stuff. We went through the first vision. We had that first vision talk. I talked about, you kneel down, look up, what do you see? I said feet, and then we went into how big, the pillar of light is. Went through all this stuff with Jerry. And he saw the changes in the first vision. He got into that really well. And so I had a bunch of stuff on it that I got from Wesley P. Walters. He would send me stuff. So I gave that to Jerry because he said, I want to be the expert on the first vision. Okay, Jerry, it's all yours. So he became the first expert of the first vision. And eventually, people at work were asking me questions. Is Jerry still a Mormon? Me in the corner. I go, I don't know. Why don't you ask him? Oh, no, I'm not going to ask him. No, I'm not going to ask him. Yeah, is he still a Mormon? You know if he's a Mormon. I said, why don't you ask Jerry? He's the one. Ask him if he's a Mormon. Oh, no. You know. I said, well, one thing for sure. When he quits wearing the Mormon underwear, ain't no Mormon anymore. And he going, okay. Is he still wearing the underwear? Well, how do we know that? Because where we worked in a radiation area, and you had to go in a change room, take off your home clothes, and you're in your underwear, and you go around to the hot area, and you put on the coveralls that were radiation coveralls, and then you go out into the radiation area. So, and then you have to come back the same way, and you have to do procedures to get the clothes off without getting yourself contaminated. And you go through, and you have a whole body counter checker thing, and they check on you. And so you have to be in your underwear. So there's a men's change room and a women's change room. So they separate that. Anyway, so if somebody's a Mormon, if they're wearing the underwear, it's pretty obvious. So, one day I come in, I went on vacation and come back. I come in the front door, and there's a guy waiting for me. He says, Jerry's not wearing any underwear. I go, what? He goes, well, yeah, he's wearing some, but it's not the long johns. I'm going, what? Yeah. So, okay, fine. So, so we're in there studying. He goes, yeah, I want to study for break. So we stayed in break. Finally went out to lunch. He goes, okay, we're going out. So I go out first, and I take my coveralls off and put them in the bin, and I'm walking out. And so Jerry starts taking his coveralls off and go, oh, Jerry, oh, does your bishop know about this? There's something shiny going on here, He's laughing. Goes, Marshall, I discovered I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. What do you mean by that? I says, well, if Mormonism is true, I've been reading anti-Mormon literature, so I'm damned. And if Mormonism is false, well, I'm not believing it anymore, so I'm still damned. So I'm damned if I do and damned if I don't. So I decided it's time to take the Mormon underwear off and have a burning contest. So he had a big bonfire and burned all of his Mormon underwear. So at that point, I realized, okay, he's different. And he's believing the Bible. So one day, probably a month later, I come up to Jerry. He's a mechanic. He's working on these arms, and there's all kinds of pulleys and stuff, and he's got them all laid out. And he's sitting at the table. And so I said, Jerry, how does it feel to have transferred Jesus's? He turns around, looks up at me, and says, I haven't transferred Jesus. And he knows by this time that I like to ask him 3 times because I want him to remember his answer as a Mormon. So I said, okay, Jerry, how does it feel to have transferred Jesus? I said, okay. He says, I haven't transferred Jesus. Okay, Jerry, how's it feel to transfer? Okay, I haven't transferred Jesus. He goes, okay, now ask me the question. So he's ready for the question, okay? I said, the Jesus you believe in right now. He says, okay, right now, yeah. Did he ever walk the American continent? He goes, I've transferred Jesus's. I've transferred Jesus's. He's a Pentecostal in 5 seconds, right? So, of course he's not Pentecostal, but it was funnier, Nick. So he realized, because I asked the right question, that he had transferred Jesus. Because he told me, I always believed in the same Jesus. Always thought, because he transferred so slowly, he didn't see the change. And all of a sudden he recognized, a huge change in who Jesus is, because what he does has an effect on who he is. If Jesus is an axe murderer, that has an effect on who he is. If Jesus is a child molester, it has an effect on who he is. If Jesus is the Savior of the world and he didn't walk the American continent, if you believe something different, you believe in a phony Jesus. And Jerry recognized that at that point. So that's just a story of the first guy that I came out. And by the way, it was only 9 months. So it only took him 6 months to figure out the Mormon church was wrong, from 100% Mormon to 100% non-Mormon, 6 months. Now that's pretty unusual, I think. But Jerry was an unusual guy. He was very dedicated. He wanted to know the truth, and he learned the truth. Now, you say, well, that's one Mormon. Well, yeah, his wife got out of the Mormon church. His son got out of the Mormon church. His daughters got out of the Mormon church. And all of his brothers and sisters and his mom and dad got out of the Mormon church because Jerry went and talked to them, except for one brother, Bill, didn't get out of the Mormon church. He died a Mormon still. So you can't always get them all. Granny didn't get all of her relatives either. So the question is, will you get any? Are you going to do anything? I risked offending Jerry. The first time I met him, it was a shouting match. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. You're deceived. No, you're deceived. We shouted at each other. And so he didn't really want to talk to me because he didn't want to get in a shouting match. And I don't care. I'll shout. If you want to shout at me, I'm okay. Whatever you want to do, let's go do it. I'm not going to cuss and swear, but hey, let's get on. Let's get it on. Let's get to what we need to be done. And so the question is, will you take the step of faith and witness to your Mormons? Will you make mistakes for Jesus? Because no one's perfect. So I got to go out there and make mistakes, and I'll get better at it. Just like riding a bicycle. When I went from the tricycle to the bicycle, I made mistakes. I skinned up my elbows, hurt my knees. I got the handlebars in the chest or whatever. Yeah, but it was worthwhile. So like Zig Ziglar says, anything worth doing is worth doing poorly till you can learn to do it well. Go to Utah, practice on the Mormons. Come back and practice on your buddies. So that's what I'd suggest doing. So that's the story of Jerry Ellen. So Jerry, blessings. Glad you, one thing that Jerry said, I remember I was going to leave the building after a while, and Jerry came to me one day and says, I cannot tell you how much it means to me that you risked offending me for the gospel's sake so that I could come to know the real Jesus and the real salvation and go to the real heaven. Has anyone ever said that to you? I have one person that said that to me. Lots of people said other things, but that meant so much to me. I never forgot what he had to say. So God bless you, Jerry.